Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the West Midlands hybrid meeting on Wednesday, the 19th of November 2025. And we're delighted to welcome Omar Shefta from Irwin Mitchell Solicitors, who will be speaking to us today about welfare benefits and the various assessments that are available. So thank you very much. Omar, welcome.
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned, sorry about this. I'm having some technical issues. My slides don't want to go forward. Bear with me just 1 second. Always the way with technology. There we go. Right. Is that showing to everybody the slides?
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I'm Omar Shefta. I'm an Associate Senior Welfare Advisor with Irwin Mitchell. I've been with the firm coming up to about a decade now, so I'm part of the furniture. So here's my contact details. If anybody ever needs to get in touch with me, do feel free to reach out as required. Oh, my slides don't want to transition again. Let's try it again. There we go. Right. So for those of you old enough to remember, here's someone who once famously talked about going back to basics, and that's what we're going to do about PIP. So as I'm sure most of you know, it replaced disability living allowance apart from children and young people who are under the age of 16. And like that benefit, it has two components, which are the daily living and mobility components. But whilst DLA had 3 rates for the care component, the low, middle and high, PIP only has 2, which are the standard and enhanced rates for the care component. So PIP uses a scoring system for scoring descriptors to qualify for the benefit, and we will go through those shortly. You need to score 8 points to qualify for a standard rate award and 12 points or more to qualify for an enhanced rate award. So here are the current payment rates for PIP. These are up till April next year. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll have noticed that they are the same and equivalent to disability living allowance and attendance allowance. So these are the actual PIP descriptor activities. As you can see, there's all 12 of them. 2 of them are in a different colour. Would anybody like to hazard a guess as to why those last 2 are in a different colour? Feel free to shout out any answers.
Is that your mobility assessment bit?
Absolutely spot on, perfect. So that's right. So the first 10 relate to the daily living activities, and the last 2 relate to the mobility activities. So you can score your points across up to 10 activities for daily living, but only 2 for the mobility. So well done. So just moving on to the first descriptor then, this is preparing food. So as you can see from the breakdown of points, it is possible potentially to actually qualify for the standard rate daily living award purely from this activity alone. You can only score from one particular descriptor though per activity. So let's say a client, yourself were able to, you needed supervision or assistance to prepare a meal, but also needed an aid or adaptation. It would only be the higher point scoring activity that you'd get the points for. So you can't say, I want 2 for using an aid appliance and 2 for needing prompting to cook a meal. It would just be one or the other. Having been...
Can I ask a general question here? And I think one of the problems that people have when they're filling in these kinds of forms is that everybody looks at themselves normally under the best possible light. Like, on a good day, I can really do this.
Yep.
But in practice, you've really got to be looking at it at the other extreme, haven't you? On a bad day, I can't do this. And I just wondered what your perspective was on that.
So it was something I was going to cover later on, but I can discuss it now. So it's essentially how it's assessed is how you are for the majority of the time. So if you have more good days than bad days, that's what people would take into consideration. However, if you say you have 4 days a week of bad days, or 6 months in a year, that's what you want to be focusing on. It is very easy as well if you're particularly completing the form for somebody else to think that what you do is part and parcel of everyday life, when is actually what you need to do is step back, take a look at it and say, well, am I doing something different to my colleagues and peers or other family members? Do they have to do the same things for that individual? If not, that's what you need to sort of focus on, say, well, actually, and recognize the extra effort that you're having to put in.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, perfect. So having been to as many PIP assessments as I have, it won't come as a massive surprise to me if DWP's assessors decided that these two individuals here were able to cook and prepare a simple meal unaided.
Agreed. Yes.
So having a look at descriptor number 2 then, as I just mentioned, it's important to remember that a descriptor applies if it affects you for the majority of the time. So as I said, 4 days a week or 6 months in a year. With regards to needing an aid or prompting or support, it's a matter of having the need for that as opposed to actually having it. So if there's a need for you to have an aid or adaptation enabled to take nutrition, but just because you haven't got that doesn't preclude you from not being able to get that descriptor scored. So it's a case of if you actually need it and you can demonstrate the need for it, that's acceptable and that will be sufficient to qualify for that award. And here's one of my heroes demonstrating his ability to take nutrition unaided. So for PIP, if you have a terminal illness, it is possible to make an expedited claim under the special rules. That applies for claimants who are not unfortunately expected to live beyond 12 months. In order to do so, it'd be a case of contacting the PIP helpline, explaining over the phone that you wish to claim under the special rules. Someone else is able to do that on behalf of the claimant as well, including a doctor or a nurse. They would need to complete an SR1 form, but they can do that for them. If the award is made under the special rules, the claimant would automatically receive the enhanced rate for daily living, and normally it's awarded for up to 3 years, and it can be reassessed if, God willing, the claimant lives beyond the 3 years. The mobility component would still be assessed, but the 3-month qualifying period would not apply. So again, it would expedite both components of that. So this is the PIP claim process. So initially you'd phone up, you request what's known as the PIP2 form, complete that and send that off, sort of citing the descriptors that you feel are relevant. The DWP would then arrange an assessment. So these can be paper-based if they've received a detailed form and supporting medical evidence. So they can just make the decision purely based on the form. It could be conducted by telephone, a video assessment, or in person. Now, if you receive an unsatisfactory decision, the first step to challenge that would be to request a mandatory reconsideration. So that's to request DWP look at the decision again. Previously, DWP had an internal memo that was circulated many years ago that told staff to reject 80% of mandatory reconsiderations offhand without even looking at them. So I had some wonderful cases, including several where claimants didn't receive notification of a PIP assessment. So the claim was closed. We sent in a mandatory reconsideration advising that we had no notification of the assessment needed of the claimant, so how could they be expected to attend? And DWP still upheld their decision, saying that they weren't entitled. Magically, when we went to tribunal with those same cases, suddenly DWP turned over their decisions and decided that they would rearrange a new assessment. So it was very much in action, that policy. Thankfully, there has been an uptick in it. They no longer implement that. And generally, it's rare that we actually have to progress a case as far as tribunal, because if we get a poor decision, more often than not, we manage to get them overturned at the mandatory reconsideration stage.
And how much of that, Omar, is a function of you being a solicitor who's always dealing with these sorts of claims to expedite that? Because I guess it's a bit more tricky if you're an individual who's trying to do that.
So I once went to a tribunal hearing actually where our claimant didn't attend. So the judge actually made a decision based on the paperwork, and he actually said it's the first time we've actually had such a good submission from a solicitor. I said, well, that's because I'm not a solicitor. I'm just a benefits advisor actually myself. So it does help having the sort of knowledge and expertise, but actually, provided you sort of tie the application and the appeal to the descriptors and showcase those descriptors, which are available online. If you go to the CAB website, the descriptors are there, and other websites as well. So as long as you sort of put the evidence together regarding the descriptors, it is possible for anybody really to do it. Individuals can challenge. I've seen people successfully challenge them without sort of even needing minimum input from someone like myself.
Yeah.
But I mean, having an expert does help, and obviously it's quite a daunting process looking to challenge a benefit decision, because you're thinking, what if I get it wrong? If I have to go to tribunal, speak to a judge, so it can be quite an overwhelming process. I think what I always say to people, even with completing a form, is, and the same with an appeal, don't try and do it all in one day. Sort of take steps, do a little bit, put your evidence together, think about it over a period of days. That, do I have to do X? Do I have to do Y? Do I have to do, and evidence it and document it, and then submit it. And one other thing that people can often fall out, it's a really basic thing, is anything that you send to DWP, keep a copy of, because the number of times that they've claim that forms have gone missing or haven't received an appeal submission, and there's nothing worse than having sent something like that in that you've put your heart and soul into, and then having to do it all again. So always, 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 if you take nothing else away from today, keep a copy of any form, anything that you've submitted to them in writing. Please do keep a copy of it, photocopy, electronic copy, whatever, just so that if it goes missing in the post or anything, you can just print it out again and send it again.
Omar, do you
Yes.
suggest that the applicant should take a person with them to any assessment, and if so, who is the best person?
I'd say the best person would be anybody who knows them well. So it could be a family member if they provide relevant support and guidance. It could be if they have a case manager. It could be for our clients that we're the deputy for, a member of our team just do attend the assessments as well. But really, I mean, we've been to assessments where we've had to say minimum or next to nothing because there's a family member there. It could be a parent, a sibling, a close friend. If they can detail the conditions, what the issues are on a day-to-day basis, anybody that can provide that information is absolutely fine to go. I mean, in some instances, claimants do choose to go by themselves. I think personally, it's better if you have somebody with you, just because, as I said again, it can be quite overwhelming, and you might not realize. You might, sometimes people go in and say, "Oh, well, the assessors have come across very friendly, so can you do this, that, and the other?" Yeah, I can do this, I can do that. And that's what they use and say, "Well, this person said they can do this, so they don't score any points." Whereas if you have somebody else with you, they might challenge you actually and say, "Well, actually, you struggle a bit with that, or you need this bit of support or help." So just someone that does know you and can detail the difficulties.
Okay, thank you.
One thing about DWP and challenging a decision is that when you get a letter back from them that says that you've got you can challenge the decision, it always says you've got 1 month to submit the mandatory reconsideration, and it's the same for appeals. You've got 1 month to appeal a decision, and that can send people into a bit of a flap and think, "Oh, I've only got this much time. I've got to move it, ASAP." That's actually not correct. Legally, you've actually got 13 months to challenge a decision. You just need to state a reason for that. So what we've always said is that you were either gathering medical evidence, gathering supporting information, seeking professional guidance, anything like that. Just putting that line in makes it acceptable. I've never come across in 10 years DWP or a tribunal rejecting a submission on those grounds, because legally the regulations do say you have up to 13 months to challenge a decision. So if you're ever having to challenge one, you see that 1 month written on the letter, don't panic. It is actually 13 months.
And then, if a decision is overturned, so it's successful, does a person receive money retrospectively for what the
Yes,
period was?
it would. So yeah, it would be backdated to the point of the decision. So it would be backdated. And it can have a knock-on effect. Well, somebody will say claiming carers allowance, and the carers allowance stopped because the PIP was no longer, daily living was no longer being paid. The carers allowance could then also be retrospectively back paid as well.
Okay, thank you.
Omar, can I just raise a question? It's going back to the previous point about having somebody with you. I went along with our son to an assessment, a medical assessment for the PIP, and we actually challenged what they'd actually written on the medical assessment form when we'd seen it, because some of it was factually incorrect.
Yeah.
And they'd also taken extreme positions in terms of, can you raise your arm above your head? Well, with extreme difficulty and whatever was appropriate, but the answer on their form was simply yes. So we challenged on that basis. So I think, just supporting your point, that having somebody with you is absolutely vital, and then being able to go back and confirm what is written on the form was actually what you said at the time is so important.
Absolutely. Now, you can also request a recording of the assessment as long as you notify them in advance. So regardless of the format they conduct the assessment, it could be a video recording or an audio recording. I think doing something like that puts the assessor in a bit of alert, you see, so that in terms of what they're documenting, in terms of what's factually correct and incorrect. As you mentioned, it's always worth, if you're having a challenging decision, getting requesting a copy of the assessor's report and seeing what they've actually submitted to the DWPs. I've seen reports which don't even relate to the claimant, that essentially the assessor just copied and pasted a report for somebody else. It's even had somebody else's name on it, but it had his claimant's name on the front of it, and that was gone through, and that was used to make a decision. Obviously, I take glee then in ripping those to shreds and saying, how is this a credible source, when it's just purely a copy and paste job?
Yeah.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. On the recording part, like you said, we can we can ask them to record the interview if it's over the phone. Can we do that in person if they do the assessment as well in person?
Absolutely,
we
yes.
can put our phones on record it as long as we notify them.
It probably won't be on your phone, but if you request it ahead of the assessment, so contact when you get the letter inviting you to an assessment, if you phone them and would like the assessment to be recorded, they can make arrangements for it to be recorded, because it has to be on their source rather than yours.
Yes.
So they'll have a tape recorder or a computer or something to record it and then provide you a copy of that if requested.
Right. Okay. No problem. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So if the decision isn't satisfactory following the mandatory consideration, the next step would be to appeal to tribunal. And if following the tribunal hearing, if you still disagreed with the decision, it is possible to appeal to the upper tribunal. But in order to do so, there would need to be an error in law documented with their decision. In 10 years, I've only ever actually been to the upper tribunal twice, touch wood. Following that, if you decide to still challenge it further, it would be a case of going through judicial review when you want sort of a public law specialist, and there would be significant cost implications probably to do that as well.
Yeah.
That covers all of my slides regarding PIP. Anybody got any other questions before I move on to universal credit?
Yeah, I've got a question. Sorry, it's from what here. I'm a case manager. In terms of, obviously, you talked about the assessment and the decision, and then at some point it comes around to the point of review. So say you've been awarded PIP, and then so many years on in the future, and you have a review and you complete, I've done with another client, completed paperwork for that. And then a sort of subsequent decision has been made. I think this is maybe what people might experience now as well, about kind of goalposts having shifted, although obviously the categories and all the scoring is still the same. But I've had some just recently go from enhanced on both to 0 on everything. And things have moved on for them, but they haven't moved on that far. And I'm just thinking about the actual, not like the initial application, but actual the review process when that comes round. Does that follow exactly the same path? Have you got any advice about that and how to robustly defend it through the reconsideration form?
Yeah, it is exactly the same, to be honest. That the process is the same whether it's the review or the initial claim. Now, to be honest, with both work capability assessments for universal credit or ESA and PIP, it really does, what I found, boil down to the assessor. If you've got a good assessor who knows what they're doing, they'll document things correctly and provide the relevant information, and you'll have a really smooth, straightforward claim. When you've got assessors who don't know what they're doing or sort of seem to have an agenda almost to get people off the benefit, that's when you get these factually incorrect things. Now, if somebody was previously getting the enhanced rate of PIP and there's been no change in their condition, and the assessor suddenly said, oh, well, this qualify for nothing, I mean, that should really be straightforward to challenge, because what I do in that circumstance is probably just go to the GP, say, can you provide a statement or a note saying that there's been no change in this person's conditions? Submit that with the mandatory reconsideration, say this is what they were getting previously, there's been no change whatsoever. We've as long as the review form says that as well, that there's been no change, because there's tick boxes, I don't know if you've seen the review forms, that says has there been any change in your condition. So if you've ticked there's been no change and they've suddenly said, well, there has, well, what proof do they have? If the medical professionals are saying as well that there has been no change, what you'll probably find then is that DWP come back and say, well, actually, there hasn't been a change, so we'll reverse that and give them the award that they were given.
I think in this circumstance, the review is taken, so DWP and the delays.
Yeah.
So it was due for due for assessment, then that was delayed, and then the whole review process has taken so long. This person has made some progress, which is absolutely great, but made progress that every single category goes to 0, and also it then affects Motability car. They've been notified and will be withdrawn in a few months' time, and also the carers allowance. So gone through everything.
On the Motability front, if you are challenging the decision, you can notify Motability of that, and then they can delay the get the car back, so that if you've notified them that we're challenging the decision, we're in the process, and keep them informed of that, they can sort of move the deadline for getting the vehicle back. It's only a case of, if you're not challenging it or it's been finalised that, you know, this is the award, there's no entitlement. But as long as you notify Motability, they will generally be quite cooperative and you know, move the date to get the vehicle back forward according to, you know, the appeal process.
Thank you.
Omar, I've got a question, please. So if someone has received a rejection, at what point do you suggest they seek legal advice to better their chances of a favourable outcome?
Now I'm sort of knocking back, you know, work for myself, but I mean, you don't technically need legal advice. I mean, there's plenty of organisations that also do benefits work up to a certain level without cost. So, you know, like Citizens Advice can offer some support. Local authorities have some welfare rights provision as well. I know that some organisations only go up to a certain stage and may, you know, these ones may not go up to tribunal. It's really a case of sort of how confident you are yourself. I think the biggest thing, what I will say, is any claim is being consistent as well. So some people I've seen, when they've completed a PIP form, they'll complete every single box there. They've got issues with every single thing. Now, I mean, the descriptors regarding sort of communication and reading have got a really, really low threshold. So the actual sort of guidance on that is what they class as basic, simple verbal information would be, I would like a cup of tea, please. And what they class as complex information is, I would like a cup of tea, please, with milk and 2 sugars. I think that's ridiculous. Yeah, I'm sure you all think that's ridiculous, but that's what the actual guidance is, and that's what would sort of be applicable. That's what a judge told me as well. So that's what they base it on. So I've seen people saying, I've got difficulties with communication and I struggle to read. And that's the kind of really low bar on those descriptors. So I'm always wary of people when they completed the whole form, so I've got issues with absolutely everything. It's better definitely to focus on the areas that you have got considerable issues with and focus those, and then be consistent. So when I complete a form, say for somebody, I will detail those things, and if I challenge a decision, I will challenge it based on those same things. What people can do wrong is that you can say, well, I've got issues with everything, and then if it comes to reconsideration or tribunal, they say, well, actually, I don't really have an issue with that one, but I've got an issue. If you've undermined your own credibility, that's what sort of sticks in a judge's mind. An example I can give you is that when I started about 10 years ago, I went to a work capability assessment for a gentleman. I was just sat in, I wasn't representing or anything like that. It was just to see how the process went. This gentleman did have substantial drug and alcohol abuse problems, as well as some disabilities. And I listened to him tell the judge what his issues were. And at the end, the judge granted him the limited capability for work and work-related activity. And I asked her afterwards, I said, you know, what made you give him that award? Because I felt a lot of his issues related to the drug and alcohol abuse rather than disability. She said, well, no, he was upfront with what issues were caused by the drug and alcohol abuse, what difficulties were caused by his disability. So as a result, I had no reason to doubt what he was telling me. I felt he was honest and upfront, and that's why I've granted him the award. So I've always carried that forward with me to make sure that, you know, we're consistent from day one. If we're saying we've got an issue with this particular task, that should be the same in the mandatory reconsideration. That should be the same at the tribunal. If you start changing the activities and descriptors, you're undermining your own credibility. So it's always important to remain credible.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
The only thing I was going to add to that, maybe, Omar, was that I know that one or two of our members who are also members of Headway have had Headway support them through the process. And I think that's the you know, they've been quite helpful in that regard. So Headway, as another organisation, have quite a lot of experience in supporting people.
Yeah, I mean, there are, you know, professionals that do this sort of work as well, and organisations. I mean, our firm does to a certain degree for our clients as well. Other law firms do as well. like I said, it is a case of it. I think if you're consistent, I know people represented themselves at tribunal and won. I've been to tribunal. I mean, in 10 years, I've lost 2 cases at tribunal, I'll be honest with you. But so, even solicitors don't necessarily guarantee that, you will win the case. I think the biggest thing is that consistency. So if the information is consistent, it strengthens your case. And any medical evidence or supporting evidence you can get, bolsters the case as well. So if your GP provides a statement, so when I do an appeal for somebody, I will draft it, I will send it to the GP and say, can you provide a supporting statement that, emphasizes these points? They will do that. I will cite that in the submission and send it in. And then more often than not, when DWP see that, they will reverse the decision prior to any sort of hearing, touch wood. So, get any evidence that you can that supports the case.
Yeah.
So moving on to universal credit, I will start off by saying that it's got nothing to do with these guys at Universal Studios. So, don't feel any ill will towards them or when they open the theme park, etc. It had nothing to do with these benefits. So the aim of universal credit was to simplify the existing welfare system, centralise and cap payments, and incentivise work as opposed to welfare. Not sure it's really met those aims. It's definitely not simplified the system, I'm sure most people will agree. These were the 6 benefits that it's replaced. So it was income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment support allowance, income support, child tax credit, working tax credit, and housing benefit. So this is the standard eligibility criteria for universal credit, in that you need to be at least 18 years old, with some exceptions, which I will cover. Not qualifying age for state pension credit unless you're part of a couple and your partner is under state pension age. You need to be habitually resident and have right to reside in the United Kingdom. Not in full-time education, again with some exceptions, which I will cover. And you need to be in acceptance of the claimant commitment, which I will also cover. So talking about claiming at age 16 or 17 years old, you need to meet one of the following criteria: have limited capability for work or be awaiting assessment for it, have a regular substantial care responsibility for a severely disabled person, be responsible for a child, be part of a couple with responsibility for a child, be pregnant and be less than 11 weeks until the due date, or were pregnant and it's been less than 15 weeks since confinement, or you have no parental support, so you could be in, say, local authority care. This is the eligibility criteria when claiming in full-time education. So have no parental support on taking non-advanced education. Now, the second point here is quite interesting. This brings us to what's called the universal credit black hole. So it says you need to be entitled to PIP or DLA and have limited capability for work or work-related activity. Fine. In order to claim universal credit via that criteria, you need to have limited capability for work decision. But in order to get a limited capability for work decision, you need to make a claim for universal credit. But in order to make the claim for universal credit, you already have to have that limited capability for work decision. So yeah, catch-22 in the flesh. There was a workaround put in place for that regarding people claiming contribution-based ESA on a credits-only claim, but DWP closed that loophole as well. Looks like a jump slide. The other criteria, though, responsible for a child, part of a couple in full-time education with responsibility for a child, be a single foster parent, or you're of state pension credit age, but your partner isn't. So how to claim universal credit? In an ideal world, DWP want you to make the claim online, but there is also provision to make the claim over the phone. Once you've started the online claim, you have 7 days to complete it. And in order for the claim to start, you must accept that all-important claimant commitment. So the claimant commitments, this outlines the expectations upon you as part of the entitlement to universal credit. So there are 4 groups. The no work-related requirement group is essentially the same as the old ESA support group, in that DWP recognise you're not capable of doing any work, you're not going to be capable of doing any work in the near future. So essentially, they leave you alone, don't have any expectations or requirements of you. The work-focused interview is where DWP suggests that whilst you can't currently work, they feel it would be beneficial for you to meet with the work coach and look at any barriers preventing you working at present and how you can overcome those going forward. The work preparation group is similar to the previous group, but also there could be expectations to do things like, say, complete training courses, build a CV, things like that, with a view to joining the workforce in the future. excuse me, the all work related requirements group, essentially you got to spend at least 35 hours a week trying to find work and evidencing that you have done so. It's really important at the start of making the universal credit claim that you identify and detail any barriers that might prevent you from doing any of these things. So whether it's caring responsibilities, disabilities, or a medical condition, because if you don't accept the claimant commitment at the outset, your claim will not progress. So really important to tell them if there's any restrictions on that so they can put you into an appropriate group regards the claimant commitment. In order to claim as a couple for universal credit, you have to actually do two separate claims. So one partner would make the claim and receive a partner code. The second partner would then make their claim, input the partner code, and the two claims would be linked and then become a joint claim. So here we have a rarity, a happy couple who successfully made a joint claim for universal credit. Now, UC is designed to mimic the world of work, so the benefit is paid in arrears once a month, unlike the legacy benefits it's replaced, which were often paid every 2 weeks. This is paid once monthly. There is a provision for payments to be split for couples, so that it needs to be detailed. So if, say, a risk of harm or abuse, then payments can be split into two separate accounts. It will be paid on the same date every month and assessed over the month. So where legacy benefits, you get the same amount every 2 weeks, every month, and you knew exactly what you're getting, UC payments can fluctuate. So if, say, somebody's earnings have increased over a month, that would be taken into consideration and the UC payments would reflect that. So it is calculated on a month-by-month basis. But you can check the statements online as part of the universal credit claim, which will detail exactly what you're getting, how much you're getting, and why you're getting it, really. Now, as it's paid in arrears, this can cause issue for people who've previously been receiving fortnightly payments. There is provision to request advances. Now, just be careful with this because this was exploited by fraudsters in the past. So people who were making claims for universal credit were told that they could get extra money if they made a claim for universal credit. So they'd pass over consent details to these scam artists who would then contact the WP, request an advance, give the claimant a little bit of that money, pocket the majority of them for themselves, and then disappear. And then it would only be at the end of the month when the claimant received their statement, which showed deductions for an advance payment, that they'd realised that actually I've been taken advantage of here. This person's taken money out against my universal credit claim, which I'm having to pay back, and they've disappeared with it. So just be very wary of the advance payments. Make sure it is you requesting it and nobody else requesting it on your behalf. Changes of circumstances for universal credit need to be notified in a really timely manner because they will affect your claim for the entirety of that assessment period. So this can work both ways. If, say, you had a child living with you who's moving out of the house and no longer part of your household, if you told DWP of that on the last day of the assessment month, it would be considered that that child wasn't living with you for the entirety of that month. So the payment would be reduced for the entirety of that month. On the flip side, if you had a new baby born into the household, say, on the last day of the assessment month, and you notified DWP of that, that child will be classed as being present for the entirety of that month, so the payments would increase for that month. So it's really important that you notify of any changes and are aware of the assessment dates. So universal credit is made up of multiple elements. These are the standard allowance, which is, as it says, it is the standard sort of amount that somebody can receive. This can be paid as a single rate or a couple rate. The child element is equivalent to the old child tax credits. The disabled child element equivalent to the additional child tax credits for a disabled child. The ill or disabled adult element is equivalent to the additional monies people would get for having a disability, so employment and support allowance or income support. Carers element is exactly what it says it is. However, to get the carers element, you don't actually need to be in receipt of carers allowance. So provided you meet the criteria of providing at least 35 hours or more of care to somebody per week, you can get the carers element, provided that person's got the relevant disability qualifying criteria, you can get the carers element. Housing element replaces housing benefit, and the childcare cost element replaces the childcare costs in tax credits. Now, there will also be potentially transitional payments that some people might see on their UC statements. So under the universal credit regulations and legislation, no one should be financially worse off switching to universal credit. Now, for example, claimants getting income-related ESA with the severe disability premium would actually be worse off on universal credit because that SDP element outweighs the LCWRA element in universal credit. So as a result, DWP will put in a transitional payment, which is it will be worked out as a fixed amount, and it would be the difference between what you'd be getting on the legacy benefit and what you're getting on universal credit. So that'd be an additional payment paid up so that you are not financially worse off. However, those transitional elements will be eroded over time. So when, say, the benefits uplifts come in April, if, say, the standard element went up by £5 a month, claimants with a transitional payment wouldn't see an increase of £5 a month until that transitional element was eroded. So if they were getting, say, a £20 transitional element, that £5 will be reduced off that transitional element. So they'll be getting a £15 transitional payment because the £5 will be eroded by the uplift. Any changes in circumstances can also affect the transitional element. So if, say, somebody has a partner moving and they were getting the transitional payment as a single claimant, that transitional element would then go. And once the transitional element's gone, it can't be put back into payment. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it can be a little bit confusing with the transitional payment.
Yes.
I don't know. Basically, what it means is basically what it means is during the time they transfer you to the thing, they make sure they cover the cost. Otherwise, it's income.
Yeah.
You get to that money.
Yeah, so you won't be any financially worse off, but when the uplifts come or any changes come, you won't be actually better off until that element that you were getting, the additional element, is used up essentially. So, I mean, the example I used here was that Bruce Banner was getting a £20 transitional payment. His income from employment's gone down, but his payments won't go up until that £20 is used up and eroded by the increase in his benefit payment.
Yeah.
So just a few key points on universal credit. So whereas tax credit's considered working hours as well, universal credit couldn't give a monkeys about working hours at all. It's purely based on income. So it's only the income that's received that's taken into consideration. Universal credit has actually got a more generous taper rate than tax credits. So you get to keep more of your money per pound from earnings than you would under tax credit. So actually, some working people who were getting tax credits are actually slightly financially better off on universal credit. They were one of the groups that did win on switching to universal credit. All the disability premiums now removed from the work capability elements under universal credit. So things like the severe disability premium or the enhanced disability premium, they're no longer payable. Income and capital are both considered for the equivalent tax credits element. So whereas people could get tax credits because the capital wasn't taken into consideration, that's no longer the case under universal credit. Income and capital are both factored in. So there was an amnesty where any capital over 16k is disregarded for 12 months when somebody's migrated from tax credits to universal credit. But we've probably reached or are reaching the culmination of that. So people who was maybe still had some universal credit entitlement because of the capital will probably find that now they will no longer be entitled to it. As mentioned, it is paid in arrears, so hence the 5-week leading until the first payment from when you made the claim. It did used to be 6 weeks, but it's been changed to 5. Be aware of the journal and message requests on the journal for universal credit. I have encountered claims where DWP have sent a message on the journal asking for some information. Unfortunately, someone hasn't responded to that, and as a result, the claim's been closed. So you should get notifications via email or phone that there's a message on your journal. Do check those, respond to those in a timely fashion, because you don't want your claim being closed over something really trivial like that. So here's my wife's favourite TV presenter, which must mean it's question time.
Omar, can I just ask about the transition process
Yes.
from legacy benefits into universal credit? Because I thought they were all supposed to have been completed by now, but that's clearly not the case.
They should be. All the remaining migration notices should be sent across by December at the latest, because all the legacy benefits are scheduled to close in April. So with the 4 months that you have for the migration, all remaining people on legacy benefits should get the migration notices at some point in December at the very latest.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, we certainly haven't received anything yet, Steve, have we? You haven't received anything for ESA as yet, nor
can I just ask, are you getting income related ESA or contribution based? Because if you're getting contribution based, you won't be migrated. That would just switch to a new style ESA, so you won't get a migration notice for that. It's only income related that would migrate to universal credit.
Okay, you were on income related, but I'm not sure. I'll need to check on that now. Yeah, okay, interesting.
Got a question, Omar, about the limited capability for work.
Yep.
Does that get assessed or reassessed at some point? Because my understanding is when you've got that, you don't have to keep going for these kind of constant kind of discussions about how are you going to get into work. But I've got someone who, without us realising, has ended up back in that circle of having to go to 2 weekly appointments, but they previously had been identified as limited capability for work. Right.
So it is the same as ESA, essentially. If you're migrating from ESA to universal credit, you should automatically get the equivalent limited capability work or work-related activity element. That should automatically move across to universal credit with you. Sometimes DWP overlook that for a month or so. So if that happens, do notify them and say, look, I was getting ESA, so I should still be getting this LCWRA element. It can still be.
It was an original started with the universal credit application in the first place.
Yeah, if you're starting a brand new universal credit claim from scratch, so it's not a migration, it's a brand new UC claim, then you need to apply for the LCWR or LCWRA element. Now, to do that, the best way to do it is provide fit notes from the GP to say that the claimant's unable to work. DWP will then send out the UC 50 form, which is the same as the old ESA 50 form. It's just got a different name on it. And the process is the same. So you'd complete the form, they'd conduct an assessment, and then, if you're happy with the decision, that's fine. If not, you'd have to challenge it. One difference that there is, though, is if it's just limited capability for work rather than work and work-related activity, and it's a brand new claim, you don't actually get any additional payment element. It's only the limited capability for work and work-related activity element where you get the additional payment. One other thing to be aware of as well is that the changes coming in from April are going to reduce the payments for the LCWRA element. So if somebody is looking to claim that from a brand new universal credit claim, it's best to sort of do that by around December at the latest, just purely so that you can still get the higher rate of payment, based on the payments for new claimants on LCWRA will reduce from April next year.
What's the logic for that, Omar, in terms of these disability-linked payments reducing? Is it because they're all going on to the PIP side of things? Is that how they're trying to?
It's separate. It's a separate benefit. It's basically they're just saying that the bill's too high. Really, it's a way of them cutting costs. To be perfectly frank.
We have a question. Sorry, we have a question from Liner. Who Michaela's not on that.
No, is Michaela on? No.
No, she's not. No.
She's a part-time student, and she wondered if there was any access to any benefits, as far as I was. Is that right, David?
Yeah, I think so. She was, and I think you raised it in the context of if you're in education with universal credit and you've got this black hole, as you called it, I think. But she's at university, and I think she's doing it on a part-time basis. But I don't think she's in receipt of benefits, and she wondered if she might have some entitlement here.
So potentially, I mean, depending on any disability, she might be able to claim, say, PIP or because that's obviously not means tested. With universal credit, because the problem is that if she gets a student loan, that's considered as income as well for universal credit. So that could affect the entitlement if she's getting a student loan. I mean, she could check on a benefits calculator. The university should also have some sort of potential support to advise, in terms of the finances. It's difficult to say without knowing all the details, but any other income or capital that she might have would also affect the UC entitlement.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I think the other problem is that if it's a university course, they'll often class it as advanced education. If it's part-time, there might be a workaround there potentially, but if it's a full-time university course, unless she's got the existing LCW or LCWRA entitlement, probably, and like I said, the student loan income will probably offset any UC entitlement as well, potentially.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about legacy benefits?
Yeah.
It's Julie. Hi, Omar. Thank you. So when you're talking about legacy benefits, I get quite confused when they talk about new ESA, legacy, income supported, work supported. I've only been on it since early last year. So would that be in the legacy, or was that really one of the new versions of ESA?
If you only claimed it from last year, I suspect it's going to be a contribution-based claim or new style ESA, which for all intents and purposes are the same thing. So they're both non-means tested. Because income-related ESA, it wasn't possible to make new claims from last year. So it'll be one of the non-means tested versions, contribution-based or new style. They are essentially the same. It was just that they're moving contribution-based to new style just to link it in with the universal credit regulations. But for all intents and purposes, they're both the same benefits. So that's what you'll be on it. You won't have a migration notice then if you're getting a contribution-based benefit, unless they're just switching you from contribution-based ESA to new style ESA.
We'll wait and see what comes through the post.
Yeah.
Hear about that when it arrives. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions online from anybody?
Thank you.
No?
No, I'm good. It's actually, I was just going to say that it's actually quite confusing. So thank you for taking time out and explaining it to us.
No, you're very welcome.
It's really confusing.
Yeah, it's the benefit system, unfortunately. It is field at times.
Yeah, thank you very much, Omar, for taking the time today to speak to us.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, many thanks, and we'll I'll drop you a note after the call, but be very grateful if you could send the slides through. That would be very useful.
I will email them across to you shortly.
Lovely.
Thank
Many
you.
thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.